speaking of the pandemic and how it's caused havoc on a lot of as long as we're talking about the movie world, how it's caused havoc amongst the release schedules, a lot of films. One of the studios that hasn't been completely affected by it so far and kind of has no plans to get into the fray of it at all is Sony. As Sony's, one of the Sony head honchos there was speaking at the Bank of America, at a Bank of America conference, Economics and Entertainment, and he basically said that they are not going to release any of their big films, until basically the pandemic is done. This is what he said. He said the following: "What we won't do is make the mistake of putting a very, very expensive $200 million movie out in the market unless we are sure that theaters are open and operating at significant capacity. We will not put out our very big expensive films, and not all films are the huge expensive ones, but we're not going to put out any of our very expensive $200 million movies out in market unless we are sure that the theaters are open and operating at significant capacity." Here's the thing though, Rob. I mean, that sounds like a bold statement. On its surface, it sounds like a pretty bold statement. But the reality is, when you look at Sony, what are their big, big movies? Well, they've got Morbius, and they got Venom 2, and they've got Ghostbusters Afterlife, which more people are getting excited about than maybe you would have originally thought there would have been. And that's great. But none of those are scheduled to open for like another 5 months. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Ghostbusters and Morbius might both be kind of scheduled for March. So what are we in September now? October, November, December, January, February? 6 months from now. We're thinking the theaters may be open to some significant capacity by Christmas at the latest. So, I mean, it certainly seems like a big statement for the Sony guy to come out and say that, but the reality is they don't have any movies opening anyway. Would he still be saying the same thing right now if currently, Ghostbusters Afterlife was supposed to come out in November? I mean, I don't know, but it's a pretty safe statement for him to say. Rob, you heard these comments that he made. What's your reaction to them?
Well, I feel, look, at this point, everything is in flux. I think Sony actually made a pretty good choice because, I mean, look, moving the release dates for these movies almost a year in some cases is a big gamble. Obviously, it's problematic from an economic standpoint, but they've completely circumvented having to deal with, well, are we going to move this release date? We're going to move it by a month. No, we're going to move it by another 3 months. They just made a unilateral decision, and I think it was a good one. I really think it was a good one because that way, they're not getting our hopes up. Like, John, if they move No Time to Die, I'm going to cry. I mean, I'm going to cry big tears again. And I'm glad that I know that. And by the way, I'm excited for Morbius. I'm excited for Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And I'm excited for Ghostbusters Afterlife. All three of those movies are definitely on my radar. I want to see them. And it's kind of nice to not worry about whether or not they're going to move. Not that in the grand scheme of things, whether a movie's release date moves means much, but it does to us. I think it's actually, it's a good thing. And I think they made the right choice.
You make a great point because in hindsight, I remember, whereas, Wonder Woman has now had its third, maybe its fourth move of dates, and we've had other movies doing that. I remember back when they bumped Fast and the Furious 9, and they bumped it by basically a year.
Yeah, a year.
And I remember some people, to a degree, me included, were a little bit critical of that and saying, you didn't have to move it that far. In hindsight, how wise does Universal look now that they were like, you know what? Instead of risking having to change release dates 3 or 4 times on this movie, we're just going to play it safe. We're just going to say, boom, we're going to bump it by a year. And there were a number of people to certain degrees that were kind of critical of that. Again, I admit, myself included to a degree. Mm-hmm. I was like, you didn't need to move it that far. How smart do they look now? And Sony kind of by pushing them all the way into March. And I think, when's Venom 2? Either June or July. They pushed Venom 2 to June or July. It's looking like they might have made the smart move, and now they don't have to worry about like Wonder Woman does. And now, not just, well, you know, when does Tenet get a wider release, and how does that affect Wonder Woman? Okay, let's move Wonder Woman. Now, what does that do with Dune? They don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Sony doesn't have to worry about any of that. So you raise a really great point.
And it's not just the release dates; it's the pandemic and getting people used to going back to the movie theaters and feeling safe.
Yeah.
So they've avoided not just wondering when theaters themselves would open, but more importantly, when audiences feel comfortable flocking back to the movies.
Right.
So,
all right, guys, question is, what do you think about Sony? Honestly, I think the Sony's statement is pretty much moot because they don't have any big movies scheduled to open for quite some time anyway. It's a statement nonetheless. What did you guys make of it? Jump in the comments below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.